Tom released the death grip on the steering wheel, and with his eyes closed, he put the Forerunner in park. Leaning back into the headrest, he listened to his heart pounding against his chest and took a few deep breaths in an attempt to calm his nerves. At almost 60 miles per hour, the collision had been a blur, and he had had no opportunity to swerve, but that was probably for the best. He exhaled, then opened his eyes. The Forerunner had come to a stop at a 30-degree angle, diagonally across the highway and the gravel shoulder. The passenger side headlight was dark, and the driver's side headlight beamed into the dense forest. Outside, the trees were motionless. There were no signs of the animal, but judging by the impact, Tom's best guess was that it had been a deer, maybe a fawn. He'd hit an adult male elk as a teenager, and it had collapsed the roof, almost crushing him inside the car. Luckily, this impact wasn't as catastrophic. Tom pressed the hazard button and turned off the vehicle, then rolled down the window. He listened for a few moments, but the only thing he could hear was his heart. He stepped out of the car and quietly shut the door. The night was cold against his ears and neck. The temperature was probably in the low 20s, maybe even the teens. He walked to the front of the Forerunner to survey the damage. The radiator grille, bumper, and right front fender were caved in. The passenger side headlight was completely missing, and the Colorado native license plate frame was shattered. Blood was spattered across the hood and fender, and strains of fur were entwined in the plastic cracks. Tom turned back to the embankment, looking to the east, then west, then back. But there was no sign of the animal. His head hurt. Probably a concussion from hitting the windshield. Trudging to the rear of the Forerunner, he opened the hatch, retrieved the roadside emergency kit, and removed a flashlight. He shined the light across the highway and followed the skid marks, which stretched about 30 feet, maybe longer. The smell of rubber still hung in the air. Tom started back along the embankment, shining the light across the forest. He contemplated driving away, but his conscience wouldn't let him sleep, knowing there could be a mortally wounded animal dying at the edge of the forest. Hopefully, it had died from the collision, or broken its neck on the landing, or run deep into the forest and found a final resting spot to succumb to the injuries. Anything that would keep him from using his gun. He didn't want to kill tonight. About 1/10 of a mile from the crash, Tom stopped in ankle-deep snow. "No, no, no," he whispered, shaking his head. The flashlight found the fawn, hiding behind the trunk of a Douglas fir about 40 feet directly ahead. The animal was curled up in the snowdrift, ears back, eyes closed, lying in a pool of blood-soaked snow, gasping for every breath. Tom stood there for a long time, shining the light on the fawn. Suddenly the animal sprang up, but almost immediately it dropped back into its own footprint. It looked up at Tom, then slowly turned back to the forest. Defeated, it appeared to accept its impending fate. Tom was about 15 steps down the embankment when the roar of an engine broke the silence. He turned back to the highway. Through the trees, he could barely see the shimmering headlights of a truck. The engine roared louder and louder. It sounded like an 18-wheeler, and if the driver was speeding, they'd have little time to react to the back of Tom's Forerunner still parked on the dark and icy road. Tom ran up the embankment, but slipped and fell on his stomach, partially knocking the wind out of him. He pushed to his knees, then jumped up and began high-stepping through the snow. Upon reaching the pavement, he started a full sprint. About a minute later, he reached the vehicle, climbed in, turned the key, pulled the gear shift into drive, and stepped on the gas. Snow crunched as he steered the car off the highway. Tom leaned back and fixated on the driver's side mirror. The truck was practically on top of him, and for a moment he thought it might still collide with his car and hurl him into the forest, as he had done to the fawn. The deafening engine rattled the entire vehicle as it passed. After about 20 seconds, it was gone, disappearing into the darkness of Highway 40 and the Rocky Mountains. Tom turned off the car and stepped outside. He walked back down the highway until he found his tracks. Stopping for a second, he looked up to the night sky. A coyote howled in the distance, but after it faded, there was nothing. Slowly, he traced the snow tracks down the embankment, moving the flashlight across the forest. His breath was a thick white cloud. "Hey, boy, where'd you go? Nothing to be afraid of," he said, slowly removing the Glock 17 from his belt. Halfway down the embankment, Tom spotted the pool of blood in the snow. He stopped and stared. The deer was gone. The forest was still, and Tom was alone. Wiping the snow out of his eyes, he started back up the embankment as the crescent moon disappeared behind a cloud.